And the reason why is she did some much more research about it lately afterwards, and there were kind of assumptions between us, but interesting to have the discussion. Not always nice, but interesting. I can say it was an interesting battle. But at the same time, she's gonna now tell where she is on this moment, where we came from, and what she is adding to it. Yeah. The intent is not to have a discussion about it afterwards for her. She gives the information, and with this information we go to the lunch. Yes, and there you do a transfer. I don't know which one, but you do one. And it will come back this afternoon somewhere. Yeah? Anne-Marie.
Can we sit? Sure, or you? Yeah, I will talk one by one. What?
Is it possible to hang it there?
Yeah, the decision was made to not do that, but maybe you can walk around it. You can take your freedom. You can sit, lie down, stretch. I don't care.
Yellow bear.
I will talk about 3 different elements of the research we are trying to, let's say, frame in terms of transferable skills. I will not give any questions to any answers to the questions, but I phrased it now into 3 different questions that also came up in the discussion with Dirk. So sorry for my drawings, I have to practice that a bit more, but I try to visualize it as much as I can. This was the part where we find common ground, and it sounds a bit obvious, but if you think about this model of the levels of transferring skills, actually a lot has already been touched. So if we talk about transferable skills, and I will get to the definition of it later on, because that's a topic in itself, I think. But in terms of transferring things in relation to redesigning spaces, we can see like 3 different abstract domains. I will just explain it first and then I will illustrate it a bit more. The first level is in context. You have skills that you can apply in different assignments, but within the discourse or the language of your own context. So let's say, for example, the dance context, where you have to make transfers the moment you are interacting with somebody else, or when you have to make transfers in relation to space or in relation to time. We all know these elements, right? The second layer is in relation to a context, and also you can apply that in relation to a dance context in a broader sense of it. I will explain that later there. But you can also say like, okay, you have to adjust, you have to read, you have to intervene, you have to, that's all kinds of measurements we have discovered the last days, and that's also a place where you have to make transfers as well. Then the third domain, that's the outer circle. That's right, we call it for now, but that's already a topic of discussion, because first we called it out of context. But you cannot say out of context, because you will always be in a context. So for now it's called outside context, where you really are opposing things from the dance. I say things because the definition is there, in relation to another discipline or another, how do you say that, another working practice, for example. So, well, this is not a surprise that I tell you this, probably, like, okay, we can imagine this, but what is interesting in this model is the transitions in between these different layers. So the first question I would like to oppose to you is, what do we need when we make transitions from in context to relation to context, or from in relation to context to outside context? And there is a connection with another question as well. That is how these things you are experiencing in those different domains, how does that work when you bring it back to your dance practice, or the other way around? Because we are now focusing in this week mainly on what can we bring as dance artists into another context, but it also maybe applies to what happens if you bring those experiences and knowledge back into your dance practice. Does something change? What changes? Do you have different kind of knowledge, or are you applying different kind of methods, or I don't know, it can be anything. That's one thing.
Can we ask questions?
No, you cannot. No. I'm putting it in your head, and it's up to you. Yeah. Then the second one, that's where that's already where the confusion starts in our own group within Fontes. Like, okay, how do we talk about skills? What do we mean with skills? I mean, a skill, if you translate that into a Dutch verbal, how do you say it, a Dutch word, you can easily say like, well, it's just your capabilities of a dancer, like physically, mentally, but it goes further than that. Alongside our talks, we were discovering that it also has to do a lot with how we value things as dancers and how we relate our bodies, for example, to different kind of situations. It's also about the qualities we how do you say that? We care for in terms of embodiment, or when we are practicing, or when we make the performance into a theater setting, for example. So it started with a text by Guy Coles. He did the first attempt, or actually the foundation of our definition, that transferable skills, or the skills of a dancer, we are talking about practical knowledge. We are talking about knowledge that comes from experience and knowledge by doing it. So, this is still under development. I think this is not complete yet, so I'm just opposing where we are right now. So feel free to add, feel free to take it with you and make it into something else. Then here, these 3 points, these 3 circles, I actually take this model into a more linear way, with the smallest context of the studio, the second one for now, the theater, but you can also put other spaces in it, and the third one, a specific location where we work on. And one of the main questions we constantly come back to is if you or how you define transferable skills of a dance artist, and you are talking about very specific skills that come from embodiment, and how we are dealing with situations and how we are relating with our total person, so from a holistic point of view, to a specific context. What happens with those skills when you put it in another context? And then most important thing is, how do you find a language for that? So how can we talk about skills, not in terms of general skills like, oh yeah, a dancer can collaborate very nicely because they always have to interact with the people on stage. We think, and that's a basic assumption, we have the hypothesis that a dancer, based on its specific body practice, has specific skills that can add something that is not there yet. And that's also one of the ideals that we have put in our research, that when you are talking about those specific skills, can we also differentiate them from the skills that are necessary for a specific context? Either it is in the studio, it is in the theater, or it is on a specific location, or in another context. So, that's the question that is related to that, is how do we make a translation of those transfers? How do we find a language to name those skills, and what can we add to those specific contexts based on our body practices? That's the second one. One more to go. So, I now make very briefly a relation to our ISP week, as we have now experienced it a little bit. Again, I took the 3 circles, and now I put in the museum space as the smallest context, the explicit public space with Vloeistof as the middle ground, and the biggest one yesterday with Ashley, where we are actually designing spaces based on dance knowledge, as it says, so the biggest crossover. Yes, this one is related to this one, but what I would like to add here in terms of a dancer's knowledge is what and how can we influence not only our own behavior in terms of the context, so how can we adapt by transferring skills to a specific context to add something, to make it more valuable, but the second thing that is very important for us is, can we also change the behavior of the other people who are there, so we can really redesign the context of a specific space. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you.